In 1914, in his work, The Mending Wall, Robert Frost immortalized the following words in the mind of the world. Good fences make good neighbors, so let us be neighborly then. Tonight, on Flesh Eater Courts University.
Those flesh-eaters who believe themselves to be especially pious may call upon ancestral spirits to aid in battle. By invoking oaths sworn many centuries ago by civilizations that bowed before Usharan, an abhorrent gives life to the buried dead that served their sovereign in bygone times. From lands soaked in the blood and tragedy of war they rise, once more fighting for the cause of their beloved lord. In the eyes of an abhorrent, the dead manifest as mighty spectral warriors, clad in ornate armor and carrying broad shields. But these spectral defenders are an illusion, seen only in the insane minds of the flesh-eaters. It is not gleaming warriors that rise from the grave, but moldering corpses imbued with mindless hunger and rage. As they claw their way up through the ground, they drag with them twisted remnants of the ancient civilization to which they once belonged. Rusted palisades covered with gore, and barbed fences that formerly surrounded mass graves. Blood spills forth from the wound in the earth, releasing a nauseating stench into the air, while cadaverous hands grasp at any foes foolish enough to stray within reach. The Cadaverous Barricade miniature, produced by Games Workshop, part of the Manifested Insanity manifestation lore, is a uniquely shaped, unbased model measuring 6 1/2 inches in length, and its tapered width boasts 1 3/4 inches at the center and 1 1/8 inches at the distal tips. These measurements will be important for later in the lesson, as they help us to calculate the effectiveness of the manifestation. Summoning this manifestation can be done by any abhorrent with wizard levels that is a member of a Flesh Eater Court's army. During the hero phase, the spell can be attempted using the Summon Cadaverous Barricade ability, worded as follows. Declare, if there is not a friendly Cadaverous Barricade on the battlefield, pick a friendly Flesh Eater Court's wizard to cast the spell. Then, make a casting roll of 2d6. This, of course, will follow the normal rules as addressed in the General's Handbook 2025 through 2026 under Advanced Rules, Magic, Section 2.0. Should the spell follow these rules and meet its casting value of a 6, as indicated in the upper right-hand corner, one resolves the effect. If rolling with no bonuses or penalties, the percent chance of successfully casting the spell to summon this manifestation is 72.22, which is just shy of your abhorrent successes being 3 and 4. The effect to resolve is as follows. Set up the Cadaverous Barricade, wholly within 18 inches of the caster and visible to them. This, of course, will follow the rules for manifestations as found in the General's Handbook 2025 through 2026, Advanced Rules, Magic 7.0 for manifestations. But how does one place a fence? Using the rules for manifestations with a movement characteristic of nil, we can see that our beloved fence only counts as being in combat in the combat phase. This, combined with the lack of wording in the Summon Cadaverous Barricade spell, requiring distance from enemy units, means we are free to set the spell anywhere wholly within 18 inches of the caster. The manifestations model cannot be set up on non-area terrain or upon other models, but beyond this, it can be placed anywhere within range. We talk more about where to place the model when we discuss the manifestation's uses, but for now, please observe the following. The 18 inches in radius emanating from your abhorrent does affect the direction in which the model is placed. A thin gap of open space will be cut short from your available placement area if the fence is directly perpendicular to the abhorrent who casts it. It would be much easier to just measure this by measuring from the base of your abhorrent to both distal ends of the manifestation, but this is a university, and nothing here is supposed to be either easy or practical. And so, we come to this. Our true circle is actually derived from the center of the base of the casting abhorrent, either on a 25mm Ghoul King on foot base, a 40mm Arc Regent or Gore Warden base, or a 130mm base for both the Mounted Ghoul Kings and His Grace, Sumeros Summer King. These translate to 0.98, 1.57, and 5.12 inches when rounded. Taking half of these measurements and adding 18 inches, we have the ability to calculate our true spell radius, and more importantly, the circumference. For the Ghoul King on foot, this new true spell circumference is 116.18 inches. The Arc Regent and Gore Warden claiming 118.03 inches, and His Grace and the Mounted Lords boasting a mighty 129.5 inch circumference. Why does this matter, you might ask? Well, when you calculate the total area of the circles these new circumferences form, you will start to see the effect. For this, we will need to use our radius again, as well as the radiuses of the bases of the casters, as we well cannot set the fence up upon ourselves. This gives the Ghoul King on foot 1,073.03 square inches of placement area, the Arc Regent and Gore Warden 1,107.22 square inches of placement, and finally, the High Lords 1,307.4 square inches. All of this to say, a larger casting model has more space to place the manifestation model. But most importantly, whether you are the noble fecker casting the spell, or you are watching for devious actions from a feck opponent, if you cast the barricade directly perpendicular to your abhorrent caster, in order for the manifestation model to fit within the various circles, the whole model needs to fit within the circle. And as such, the larger the base of the casting model, the further away the fence can be set when set perpendicular. You could, of course, just set your model parallel to the casting model. Before we discuss more about the placement of the model, we should review the rules on its war scroll. The Cadaverous Barricade manifestation has a movement characteristic of nil, as previously stated, a health characteristic of 10, and an armor save of 5+, and a ward save of 6+. It also has a robust banishment value of 8+. Before diving into the fence's signature ability, let's discuss these characteristics. First is the banishment value of 8+. This is one of the highest banishment values in the game, similar only to the Incarnates thus far. Having a banishment value this high is a double-edged sword, as it means that it is less likely that your opponent will be able to flatly banish it without any bonuses. Your opponent has a 41.67% chance to banish the barricade on a 2d6 roll of 8+. But beware, for each additional manifestation that you have on the field, will add one value to your opponent's dice roll. Meaning, if you have one other manifestation on the field, the chance is now 58.33%. And if you have both other manifestations on the field, the chance is now 72.22% to banish it. Things to consider. The second proverbial edge of this sword is that if you find yourself needing to banish the barricade yourself, which you can do in your turn instead of casting a spell from an abhorrent, or in your enemy's hero phase by use of magical intervention, you will then need to meet these numbers. Remember, without any bonuses, you are at 41.67% chance for banishment. With the penalty from magical intervention, you now have a 37.78% chance to banish your own fence. That's roughly only 1/3 manifestation, Why would you ever do this? Well, if you recall in the description of the spell ability Summon Cadaverous Barricade, it specifies that a friendly Cadaverous Barricade cannot be on the field already in order to cast. This means that since the Barricade has a movement characteristic of nil, there are only 3 ways for it to appear in another place upon the map for you. Either it is banished, which we already discussed is slightly less than likely. It is destroyed in combat by enemy attacks, which a clever opponent will try to avoid, but an even more cleverer FECer will make unavoidable. Or the abhorrent who cast the spell that summoned the manifestation sheds his mortal coil to go be with Nagash in a more ethereal way. The other values, namely the health and saves, give us the durability of the manifestation, or the wounds soak. You can calculate wounds soak by figuring out how many incoming wounds prior to saves a model can take before it dies. Depending on your purposes, you may want the fence to survive a combat, or you may want it to be defeated to make it available to be cast again. You should make that judgment call prior to casting the Barricade. At 10 health and a 5+ armor save and 6+ ward, this means the fence can, on average, survive 18 incoming wounds at Rend 0, 14 incoming wounds at Rend 1, and 12 incoming wounds at Rend 2 and higher. This is useful to know if you know the average output of the enemy unit or units you are placing the fence next to. For instance, a non-reinforced unit of Putrid Blight Kings should output 9 wounds at Rend 1, meaning your fence should hold. But if the unit is reinforced, that number becomes 18, which means your fence should fall. This can, of course, be manipulated on their part by an all-out attack, but if you are getting your opponents to use command points on destroying manifestations, then you deserve a small percentage raise to your grade. Excellent. It is finally time to discuss the ability of the Cadaverous Barricade, Grasping Hands. The effect of Grasping Hands is that any enemy unit within combat range, so within 3 inches, of the Cadaverous Barricade cannot use run or retreat abilities. In addition, if an enemy unit is picked to use a move ability while within 3 inches of the Cadaverous Barricade, you have the unit's movement characteristic, rounding up, for the rest of the turn. Old bones be blessed. This is a potent manifestation. Let's dissect. As a Flesh Eater Courts player, this means that you will be using the Barricade in one of 3 ways: as a hindrance, as a pin, or as a block. Using it as a hindrance is using it to simply slow down the advancement of your enemy's units. Perhaps you are trying to keep them from contesting an objective, or keep them from charging you. Oftentimes, if this is your aim with the manifestation, you will be casting this using a magical intervention. This will mean a few things in setup on your part. First, you need to ensure that at the end of your previous turn, or at the end of deployment, that the abhorrent you wish to cast this summoning spell is in position. If you are not able to place the spell both within the previously mentioned radius and within 3 inches of the unit or units you wish to hinder, you will already fail at doing so. Next, you need to make sure you have saved a command point for magical intervention. Having one in reserve for the Barricade is perhaps the most important command point you can keep, besides perhaps summon loyal subjects. Now with the penalty from magical intervention, you are casting this on an effective 7, meaning a 58.33% chance of success. Should you be able to manage these things, placement next is key when you are aiming for hindrance. For hindrance, there are 2 ways to position the fence. The first is a direct hindrance. This aims to essentially keep 1 or more units locked in position on the battlefield by placing the manifestation directly in front of the targeted enemy. we will use the following formula for a direct hindrance. Movement value is equal to 2 times base size in inches plus 1.75, also known as the greatest width of the fence. Essentially, this equation tells you whether or not a model can be directly hindered. Let's take a Gatebreaker Mega Gargant as example. We have our value for movement, or M, being equal to 10 inches. And remember, they cannot run. And our base size being equal to 130 millimeters, which we already know is 5.12 inches from before. We then do our math, taking the base measurement plus 1.75 and multiplying that sum by 2. This gives us a total of 13.74 inches, meaning that a Mega Gargant cannot cross the barricade with a movement characteristic of 10. But Profecssor, you might ask, what if the Gargant commander is King Broad, and he uses his prayer ability to add +2 to the movement value of the Mega Gargant? Well, firstly, F- to you, because 12 is still less than 13.74. And second, if you are a clever fecker, you would place the barricade at a distance of up to 2.99 inches in front of the Mega Gargant, therefore, once again, providing direct hindrance. With proper placement, we can correct our equation to movement must be equal to or greater than 2 times the measurement of the base in inches plus 4.74. Let's look at some more examples of ratios of bases to movement values and what unit those might include. For a 20mm base, a unit needs a movement value of at least 12. For a 40mm base, a unit needs a movement value of 13. And for a 130mm base, such as the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, it would need a 20-inch movement to not be directly hindered. Some of the only models that can do this are Elven Cavalry, if placed sideways to where their 35mm wide oval bases would allow them to jump the fence. But even then, they are merely getting to the opposite side of the fence. Direct hindrance is an amazing tool for directly stopping one unit in particular. In indirect hindrance, we place the fence long ways within as many enemy units as possible. This is a great way to slow an army's overall advance and has a much higher chance of guaranteeing the fence is destroyed at the end of the opponent's turn, as they will have to waste a lot of potential movement to free that number of units from the combat area of the fence. What we are looking for in this type of hindrance placement is to trap as many units as possible within the 3-inch aura of the fence. While many units will still be able to make a forward progression with this style of hindrance, it will reduce it by half. The best way to compare these things in your mind is, what does my opponent want to move and where to? Do I want to stop one thing from moving at all, or slow a much larger part of his force? Pinning is a technique you can use to hold an enemy unit in place for you to charge into them. Since the ability of the Cadaverous Barricade does not allow for run abilities or retreat abilities, this allows you, on your turn, or if you have a very confident countercharge in mind, to keep your opponents from leaving a desired area. An excellent example of this is Caradron Overlord's Sky Vessels. Their incredible armor save will often make it difficult for the noble teeth and nails of Flesh Eater Court's units to tear into, and their high movement value will often allow for a retreat on their turn. However, by pinning with a Cadaverous Barricade prior to charging, you both ensure that they cannot redeploy away to make your charge harder, nor in subsequent turns can they retreat from the fight to get their shots in. This is also extremely useful for models that have abilities that allow them to retreat and charge again, keeping them locked into a grinding combat, instead of recovering with rallies or gaining weapon bonuses from the charge. Finally, we have the block. You can use the Cadaverous Barricade to block your opponent from charging into your units by placing it either in a choke point on the map or with its most distal edge slightly more than 3 inches outside of your units, as shown. This will require your opponents to charge your collapsible fence, making it available to be summoned again on your next turn, instead of your enemy getting into your units. Remember, this will likely need to be cast as a magical intervention, and as such will have a slightly more difficult casting value. But when used this way, it can save both your vulnerable units from a devastating charge, and set your forces up for a strong charge in your following turn. A caution to the user. The final thing to note on the Cadaverous Barricade is that it can be used as a charge anchor for your opponent. Proper placement is needed for it to be a block, and the movement that you take away from an indirect hindrance might be able to be gained by a charge roll later. Direct hindrances rarely allow gain of movement, as even units that can string out from the fence on a long charge will have the amount of attacks that they have available to put into the fence reduced, and therefore risk further turns entangled by the barricade. This has been Flesh Eater Court's FECtics 2104, Arcane Architecture of the Cadaverous Barricade. If you enjoyed the lesson, please let me know in the comments below, and like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Class dismissed.